Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jay Rothman, and welcome to Real People, Real Stories Live. This day, I am coming in from the state of Arizona. I'm up in Sedona, and I'm coming in from a public place. So if my voice sounds a little low, it's because I've been asked to keep my voice down, which to me is not such an easy thing to do. However, I am excited to have in the studio with me Dr. Dicken Bettinger coming in from the state of Washington. Welcome to the studio, Dicken.
Yeah, thanks, Jay.
Yeah, it's been some time since you and I got together. If I recall, I had invited you in to have a private group that I do group sessions with on Wednesdays, and you came in as an expert to spend an evening with my coaching group. And it wasn't there shortly thereafter, maybe a week or two at most, I got word that you had contracted COVID-19, and as well as your wife, Cozy. And I only found this out through a post of, I think Cozy had, and also then your story had made a national newswires. You were, I believe, the second group of individuals. The first group that had been diagnosed was out of a nursing home up in Washington State, I think in Kirkland, Washington.
Yes.
And then you guys were the second group. Cozy was part of a choral group from church. And I think something like 60 people that had attended, 53 had contracted COVID. My numbers may be skewed a bit, but pretty close.
That's right.
And actually, two of the members did make it, they passed. The reason I wanted to invite you in today and have this conversation is twofold. One is you're in your 70s. I believe you're about 72 years old, and both you and your wife, you beat the odds, you beat the curve, and you not only survived, you are now thriving on the back end of COVID. And I think it's important for you to share part of your story of what that experience was like for you as you navigated through a horrific time, knowing that you also had some compromised breathing issues with asthma as an adult. And so I'd like to turn it over to you, Dicken. Again, welcome to the studio. And the second part of our conversation is going to be is basically on how to live in ease in an uneasy time. And so I'm going to turn it over to you.
Uneasy times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Everybody goes through uneasy times, don't they, Jay? Adversity, challenges, difficulties. Everybody I know, maybe sudden illness, death in the family, problems in a relationship, being laid off from work. Life can be a real contact sport. And as a psychologist for over 40 years, my whole focus and interest is on psychological well-being. And everybody has psychological well-being, but it gets covered over by the thinking that we get caught up in and involved in. It's psychological well-being and accessing that well-being that leads to ease. And it's particularly critical while we're dealing with challenges or adversity. So my wife was part of this group, and she got the virus, and just as she was getting over it, I caught it. And so for 2.5 weeks, I was really laid out. I've never felt so sick in my life. Constant fever, constant headache, complete brain fog, body aches that were intense. I couldn't get comfortable physically ever. and fatigue like I've never felt before. Cough the whole time and a fatigue like I've never felt before. If all of a sudden I realized I had to go to the bathroom, it would be like, oh no. I'd walk 10 steps and back and have to take a nap. I'd be so exhausted. And fortunately, because of what I want to talk about with Jay today and what I had learned, I went through all this pain without a whole lot of thinking about it. But I did have pain the whole time. But I didn't add on another whole layer of. My wife years ago used to always say, Dicken, when you get sick, you always have the man flu. You think about it constantly and you complain about it constantly. Well, I've learned some things about well-being that's been changing. And so I'm very excited about being able to share that with you. And on day 18, of the virus, having this virus, I woke up in the morning and every symptom was gone and I had energy again and my brain fog was gone. And I got to experience for 4 days, I had very little, if any, personal thinking. You know that little voice in your head that's always thinking about things? It was gone. It was unbelievable, Jay. It felt like I was a newborn baby. And I got dressed. I had all this energy, so I walked about a quarter of a mile down to our beach. And when our minds are free and clear of thinking, it's just what people call living in the now. And the now is just free of the thinking that we tend to do constantly and chronically. It's very ordinary. I mean, all of us visit the now. As a matter of fact, we couldn't drive a car if we were continually distracted by our thinking and not fully present. Right? We couldn't enjoy our friends, couldn't have moments of love and enjoyment. We wouldn't enjoy nature. But I had 4 days where I didn't have any distraction by anything I was thinking, and I was just in my senses fully. So the sound of the birds was like the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. The wind on my cheeks was unbelievably delicious. The light on the water on the ocean here brought tears to my eyes. It was so beautiful. And I lived in that, I had a spiritual teacher named Sydney Banks, and I studied with him for 23 years. And he had what many people call an enlightenment experience. And he talked about this state as being our true self, just aware presence, our natural state, our birthright, because we're born into this, right? The first number of years of our life, we're not thinking about life. We're experiencing life directly. And then we develop an intellect and we start thinking about life. And before you know it, we're living in our computer and we're constantly and chronically thinking about life. So here's an observation, and it ties in directly with ease, because I certainly experienced ease going through 2.5 weeks of physical torment because I didn't add a lot of thinking about it. Oh, this is horrible. I can't stand it. How long is this going to last? Right? Without story, we go through experiences of any kind gracefully. But you notice innocently, most of us, when we feel insecurity or upset or stress or tension, we don't immediately drop into the now. We start thinking about life. And at any moment, any human being is either present, where thoughts are flowing through, feelings are flowing through. Think of a baby. We're not judging our experience. We're not thinking about it. We're not trying to fix it. We're not trying to change it. We're not trying to improve it. That's my definition of ease. The absence of thinking that there's something wrong with what we're experiencing, so we try to feel something different. That's struggle. God, I used to struggle. Even the first 10 years I was a psychologist, everything I learned helped reinforce the notion when you don't feel good, there's something wrong. You got to work on it and you got to fix it, change it, improve it. And every bit of self-development is about, it is in a sense, innocently judging experience and saying we should feel better. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with trying to feel better or wanting to feel better. But if we live in our personal thinking, remember I said at any moment, we're present, where ease is our nature. It's not something we try to do or try to be. It's just being. And then we think about life. I call that our personal thinking because we do it. It's the thinking we do that takes us out of the now. When we're not thinking about life, like in sports, they call that being in the zone. I grew up doing sports. I loved discovering the space of pure presence, being in the zone, not thinking at all about what I was doing or what I was going to do. And the paradox is people perform at their best when they're not thinking about themselves or how they're doing or what they should do or how they need to do it or judging their own experience. Now, that's true in life in general. That's true in life in general. So here's what I learned that helped me have more ease and well-being in my life. And I learned it from this man, Sydney Banks. Here I am. He was a welder with a 9th grade education who had an enlightenment experience, and everything I learned about psychology, I learned from him. Right? I had had 15 years of psychological study before that all reinforced the self-improvement model. Right? And here comes this guy, Sydney Banks, originally from Scotland. And he said when he had his enlightenment experience, it didn't seem that extraordinary to him. You know how people talk about near-death experiences? They go into this light or this tunnel of light, and then they are free, completely free of their conditioning and their personal thinking and their ideas and their beliefs and concepts. And in that moment of complete freedom, they experience beauty and love like they've never experienced before. And then they come back. And we said, Sid, did you have a near-death experience? He said, I went into that light, but I didn't go partway in and then come back. He said, I went all the way through to the other side. It was a death experience. And in those moments, Certainly not intellectually, but on a very, very deep level. We said the very nature of life itself is an infinite field of energy. And that infinite field of formless energy, this is exactly what the physicists are saying. They're starting to sound like mystics. They're saying this infinite quantum field, this infinite field of energy, dances into form, takes form. That's where life comes from, the formless. Everything in life, nothing is created that doesn't come from the formless. Now, in a minute, that's going to make a huge difference on the degree of ease we end up feeling. So he said the characteristics of that field of energy is that it's the source of everything that is created in the physical world. Everything. It's an intelligence that knows how to create and operate what's created. It's the intelligence that's living us at this very moment. It knows how to beat our hearts. It knows how to run our pancreas. It knows how to create images in our head. It's continually creating. It's the ultimate source of creation. He called that universal or divine mind, our true mind, that which is thinking us and living us. He said another characteristic of this infinite field of energy, it's really just one field of energy, but he's using a trinity to talk about something that can't be understood by the intellect. Right? We can think about it, but it can be realized as opposed to just intellectually understood. We can get a sense of this. It's a creative intelligence. That's one characteristic, universal mind. It's the source of all awareness. So everything that's created in life has awareness because it's created from awareness. He called that the principle of universal consciousness. And it creates specific content in the world. And so for human beings, he called that the principle of thought. And he says, these are the universal fundamental building blocks of all human experience. They're foundational principles, not good ideas. They're forces in nature. It's how life works, and it's how life has always worked. So every human being thinks, is aware, and has this deeper knowing, intelligence, and connection to all of life, which really is what love is, right? That's our nature. It's our very nature. Now, he says we lose sight of our nature because we get caught up in concepts that reduce our nature into teeny little ideas. So we have this intellect. What a gift. It's like having a computer. And its purpose is to reduce complexity to concepts so that we can communicate, so that we can think about time. It creates time so that we can say, I'll meet you for lunch tomorrow. Okay. Each of us can begin to realize that what we're feeling and experiencing in any moment is not being caused by our relationships or our problems or our issues or other people. The outside world has already been created and it doesn't have the power to create. Traffic can't really create upset in us. Boy, that was a hard one to swallow at first, right? People, what they say doesn't have the power to create a feeling in us. The only thing that has the power to create is this formless energy. All right. So as I began to see, okay, now remember, I want to get this simple now. We're present and then we think about life. And when we think about life, everything we think is this power turns it into an experience. So a lot of the thinking I do when I'm sick is a complaint. I don't like being this way. I shouldn't be this way. I don't want to be this way. Now I'm in time, so how long is this going to last? This is horrible. I can't stand it. Then I start imagining things that aren't even happening in the now. Right? Like for moments, I had this extremely scary thought when I was sick that I'm going to have to go to a hospital, be on a ventilator. I'll never see my family again, and I'll die alone. Right? That thought created a feeling of enormous dread, terror, fear. Right?
And you wouldn't be human if those thoughts didn't come to you, right?
Listen, thoughts coming into us are not the problem, Jay. We all have thoughts. Look at babies again. They don't experience what we call happiness all the time. They have all kinds of feelings. They get upset, they cry, they get frustrated, they get impatient. But it flows through because they're living in the now. So any experience that flows through doesn't hurt us psychologically or even physically. And we're going to have all kinds of psychological weather flowing through. We will. But here's the deal, Jay. You can see this is because we don't understand that it's thought creating our feelings, the power of thought creating our feelings, the principles creating our feelings. We tend to think that what we feel has to do with things going on in our life. So here I am. Let's say I'm sitting in my house and my wife is she's caught up in her thinking story. So let's say she's grumbling or she's complaining or she's being critical. Now, I could have a thought that, why does she have to be this way? What's the deal, right? That thought creates a feeling. I've left the now. I'm now thinking about my relationship and my wife. I'm now thinking up a story in my head about my wife, right? Usually it's thinking that's judgmental or complaining. It creates dissatisfaction, right? Dissatisfaction in a relationship has nothing to do with the relationship. It has everything to do with the story we're telling us when we leave the now. See, I thought dissatisfaction had to do with a relationship, and when I felt dissatisfied, I'd sit down and talk to hours with my wife from a place of dissatisfaction, trying to work it out. Now, again, I'm not saying that's wrong or bad. It's just as I began to understand that my feelings were created from within me, which means beyond my physical, I'd catch myself out of the now, thinking up things that lowered my spirits and created tension. That's the only place we create tension, is when we leave the now and are thinking it up. Because otherwise we're like babies. We have experiences, but we're not reacting to it. We're not tensing up against it. We're not struggling. We're not thinking, we're not judging it. We're not thinking there's something wrong with it. Ease is the flow of thought and experience toward a mind that's fully present. That's what ease is. Every single person has access to ease, right? Even during the most difficult, challenging times, we're a thought away from the now at every moment, but we get caught up in our thought stories. We all do. That's part of being human. And so it's an interesting observation that most adults, when they feel tension, stress, or upset, innocently do more thinking about their life and themselves. More. And we can't think our way to the now, and it's only in the now that we find our well-being. It's the only place we can find peace, joy, happiness, love, contentment. right? It's the free flow. It's when we are aligned with the universe. We're not fighting it. So when we get caught up in story and try and change ourselves or life, that's what ego is. It's ego trying to fix what it's convinced is bad and wrong and shouldn't be. And when we wake up, thank goodness we feel unease and stress and tension and struggle. It's just letting us know we're caught up in story. And if you really see that I'm thinking up this tension, here I am sitting in the living room, my wife's in the kitchen, and I'm thinking about, I can't believe how she's being, and what am I going to do? And I got to figure this out, and I got to talk to her, and this is what I'm going to say. And I'm having all these dialogues in my head. And then I recognize the feeling and go, oh, feelings indicate when we're in the now and when we're caught up in story. And it's literally like waking up from a nightmare. And you go, oh, thank God. I was starting to live in a thought story I thought was real. You come back to the now. Now, here's the deal, Jay. When we wake up out of thought into the now, we immediately start experiencing ease because it's relaxing to let go of everything we're thinking. It's relaxing to not hold our thinking. The Buddhists say there's only one source of suffering, is fixating on a thing and thinking about it. It's getting attached. They call it attachment or clinging or holding. And that the absence of all holding, they call nirvana. Ease. the great ease. And you see, ego doesn't want to let go of its story because it's working up a good head of steam, and it's got this justified complaint, and it starts thinking what I'm feeling doesn't have to do with my story. It has to do with you. It has to do with something on the outside, right? So ego is like, okay, I'm justified. This is my story and I'm sticking to it. And we hold on to that story as truth. Right? When we let go of that, we're not being naive and stupid and not caring. It just means that our head will clear of all story. And when people are in the now, they deal with anything better. I did trainings in huge corporations with engineers and all different people that when they were in the now, they communicated better, they made better decisions, they had better teamwork, they were way more productive, and they had way more job satisfaction. As a matter of fact, in areas of the company that we worked, the people in that area of the company stopped getting divorced because they started waking up out of their dissatisfaction, stepping into the now. When experience flows, we start feeling connected to life in a positive way. We start our feeling shifts to a kinder, gentler feeling. You bring that warm feeling to another person. That's the only way I've seen a relationship improve. Right? So this is the life of ease is natural already. We already have everything we need. It's always here. It doesn't matter what your past is like, what your personality is like, what your situation is like. The now is dropping into what's always here, which is awareness, pure consciousness, presence. It's always here. There is only the now. And then we think and we create stories and we get lost, and then we start thinking that the feeling from that story has to do with our relationships or life. And then we start to suffer psychologically. But the good news is people can wake up to these principles. The fact that I'm thinking and thinking up experience, the fact that there's beneath all of my thinking is pure consciousness, always. It's the space in which we live. And in that space, for no reason, whatever I'm feeling starts to open up, because if you take the lid off of energy, it expands. That's why light has been used as a metaphor for ease for centuries.
Yeah.
You light a match, the light radiates all the way to the next planet, right? When I let go of all story, whatever I'm feeling radiates. And when any feeling radiates, it feels good. So hurt feels good, anger feels good, anxiety feels good when we're in this open, relaxed space of our true self, pure consciousness, the now. And people you don't have to take anybody's word for it. You don't have to take anybody's word for it. We can begin to see that we're thinkers. We live in the experience of our thinking, that we only get into trouble when we get caught up in our personal thinking. That's where problems and issues and difficulties and judgments about life happen. And that when we wake up out of those thought stories, those daymares, those nightmares we have during the day, we come back to the now, and then wisdom, this deeper intelligence, brings us new feeling, new thinking, creative thinking, fresh thinking, and that create feelings of well-being. And now we have something to bring to our relationships that bring more ease and well-being into our relationships.
Dicken, if I may, well, two things. One is I'm aware that my camera, I'm coming in a little hazy.
Yeah.
I'm aware of that, and that's why I've kept the camera on you mostly. But I do want to ask you if you could be so kind to break it down for those that clearly I'm understanding this conversation. I'm understanding exactly what you're saying of we're either living in thought or we can bring ourselves back to the now. It's simple, not easy for most. Would you be so kind to maybe share some tips on how can we bring ourselves back to the now when we've been in these obsessive thoughts that we're repeating now for 2 or 3 days, sometimes 2 or 3 weeks, that in fact will become our reality? And then the other thing I'd like you to do is there was a story you shared most recently, and I love this story. And if you could share it on the back end of that, regarding a guy who you actually saw, he was a client of yours, and he actually was living in a belief system for decades that he was so shy that he couldn't leave his home forever, and how you were able to work with him just by him changing how he was thinking about himself, how he believed he was showing up, and how that in fact changed his life. So it's a two-part.
Awareness of what's true brings us to our well-being. It's not a how-to. It's not a how-to. It's an awareness that brings us to truth. What's true? What's always been true? That brings us to the now over and over again. Realization of that we're thinkers and that we live in thought. I've traveled the world doing seminars on well-being. I've had the opportunity to ask literally thousands and thousands of people all over the world, what are you feeling? And where do you think it comes from? And it doesn't matter what people feel. We have all kinds of feelings. I have all kinds of feelings, all kinds of feelings. Think of babies, they have all kinds of feelings. But by living in the now, they also experience a lot of lighthearted playfulness, right? So I've asked people, what are you feeling? And people say, well, I'm feeling happy, or I'm feeling a little anxious, or a little depressed, or I'm feeling upset, or it doesn't matter. We're here to have feelings. It's a gift. I love that we feel life, right? Feel our thinking, our experience of life. Rarely have I found a single person who says, oh, I'm feeling sad because I'm thinking sad. Period. No other reason. I'm feeling angry because I'm thinking angry. Period. No other reason. I'm feeling happy because my mind is free of all the thoughts that create my unhappiness. Right? It's just been a simple misunderstanding that's been around for hundreds of years. This has been the human problem, is people haven't known where their feelings and experience come from. So when we don't know it, we do a lot of personal thinking. If I think my wife's upset me, I'm going to do a lot of thinking about her and what to do and how to deal with it. If I see that my upset with my wife is created by my own thinking, it's a completely different ballgame. It's completely different. When I realize I'm thinking up what I'm feeling, I now realize the source of my tension, source of my stress, source of my upset. And when I let go of that, not through effort, not through technique, when I let go of that, I find my well-being again. We come right back to the now. So here's a metaphor, Jay. This is what I mean. If for centuries people were putting their hands on hot surfaces, burning the heck out of their hand, and thinking it had to do with what somebody was saying to them at the time, you'd see that be a real problem. And then the instant people become aware, oh, when my hand's on a hot surface and I feel pain, it's because my hand's on the hot surface. Now, at that moment, do you think anybody would say, how do I do this? What do I do? Give me 5 tips. Come on, tell me. I saw my grandson when he was really young running around. He was just learning how to run, and he was so excited. He's running in circles, and he trips and falls against the grate on the fireplace, and it had a glass door. And you should have seen his reaction, and the look on his face was like, wow, and immediately he took it off. Now, listen, for years, Jay, I lived thinking my feelings had to do with what was happening outside of me. And I meet Sid Banks, and he said, innocently, humanity has gotten it completely wrong. Completely wrong. We've been blaming life for our feelings for hundreds of years, and it doesn't work that way. Life can't, external life doesn't have the power to create anything in us. Could you imagine if I had the power to create feeling in you, Jay? I would be Svengali. I could go, okay, Jay, sad. And you would have no choice. You'd feel sad. And then I'd say gleeful, and you'd be gleeful. And then I'd say angry, and you'd be angry. And it would be, it doesn't work that way. It's never worked that way.
Yeah.
So,
Yet we hear people, and we do hear people in relationships always say, "You made me feel angry," "You made me feel sad." We give people the power that they're not worthy of, meaning that we have this distorted understanding of how we don't have power over our own feelings, our own emotions. We give it away to somebody else, and we say, you caused me to feel this way. So you challenge that, correct? You don't agree with that thought.
I don't agree with it. It's not scientific, Jay. You can have somebody walk into a room with 10 people and say the worst things imaginable. And I can pretty much guarantee you'll have 10 different reactions depending on what people think. 10 different reactions. You'll have some people who will be so angry in response. You'll have other people who will be frightened. You have other people that will be calm, and you have other people that will think it's funny, and you have other people who will feel compassionate. If you have enough people, you'll see we don't live in reaction to life. We live in response to the thinking that we get involved in. Always. It's very scientific. This is not a theory. This is not a theory. It's Sid Banks discovered the true source of psychological experience. Jay, there's a very interesting scientific study from the North American Space Agency, NASA. It just came out recently. They said they've had top scientists studying the energy that's in the universe. And they say everything that has taken form that can be seen or measured with any kind of instrumentation, from the most advanced telescopes to the most advanced microscopes, electron microscopes, right? You take everything in the physical world. You know what percentage of the universe that energy makes up? 4%. You say 96% of the universe is formless energy. So Sid Banks has this enlightenment experience, and he comes back and he says, we're not our thoughts, we're not our feelings. That's 4% of who we are. And when we identify with that, that's what ego is. I am my body. And he says we're spiritual beings. Then he said actually 96% is just a metaphor, because it's really infinite. Formless energy is infinite. There's no boundary, no limit, no end. That's our true self. And he made the startling claim that every bit of the 4% is not created by anything in the 4%, is created by the 96%. That's the quantum field out of which matter condenses. It's the same energy condensing, right? That's the true paradigm, the true scientific paradigm in science and in psychology and in spirituality. The true paradigm is an inside-out paradigm, from formless into form. So we're thinking beings, and we can innocently get caught up in thought. So I'll tell a different story, Jay, because I'm telling the one that comes to mind, but it's a good illustration. I get a call from a school, and they say, we have a 7-year-old boy in our school, and we think he's so emotionally disturbed that he needs to be taken on a public school and put into a school for emotionally disturbed kids, right? Now you have to understand, I have one diagnosis now for all people. We're all perfectly healthy at core. And we get caught up in our thinking in ways that we get into trouble. But for that thinking, we come right back to perfectly healthy again. We're in flow, we're in ease, we're in presence, right? So I say, well, how come you think this kid needs to be taken on a school? And he says, well, we have to pay an adult to stand next to him all day long, because he gets so angry, and he is big for a 7-year-old. And he slammed a kid up against the wall and gave him a concussion. He hits kids really hard, really hurts them terribly. And the worst thing is, he's a biter, and he'll bite anybody that he's angry about it, and he draws blood, and the parents are fed up and saying, our kids aren't safe with this kid in the classroom. And so they have an adult literally stand next to him as like a guard. And I said, well, what's going on in this kid's life? And he says, well, his dad was just reported for physically abusing him constantly and chronically for 7 years. And the dad is now mandated in therapy, and we're looking for we're looking for someone to work with the son. And you've done a lot of work with kids. At that point that was when I first started learning about this. So this little boy comes into my office. He throws my door open. He runs across the office, Jay. He runs to my desk. He opens the drawer, starts throwing things out all over the room. He knocks over an antique lamp that I had on my desk and broke it. That's my introduction. And I say, hey, hi. He didn't even see me. I go, hey, hi, how you doing? You must be so-and-so. Come on over here. I want to show you something. Now, this is the oldest trick in the book that parents have. You distract somebody who's upset. You distract a kid who someone's upset. In other words, distracting them is really inviting them to come into the now rather than being caught up in their angry story or upset story. And he comes over and I show him a fossil from a prehistoric shark, and we start talking about sharks, and he was all excited because here's the primal prehistoric biter, if you will, and we have all kinds of thoughts. And this was a fossilized vertebrae, and we're talking about, I have those, you have them, and before you know it, he's present, he's funny, he's warm, he's kind, perfect well-being. Perfect. It's right there. He's always had it. Everybody I've ever worked with has always had it. Always. And he had no clue that his anger was created from thought. So I couldn't just say to this little boy in the first session, or it didn't occur to me how to say it to him. I couldn't just say, your anger is just thought. So there you go. So I met with him a couple of times and we played the whole time. So now he sees I'm a different kind of adult. I'm present, I'm warm, I'm kind, and he's drawn into that, and he's being that way with me. And he's the most likable kid you would ever want to meet. And then it occurs to me. And I say to him, did you ever play hot potato? He says, what's that? You have a group of your friends, you take a ball, you throw it around the circle, you set a timer for like a minute. Whoever's holding it, when the timer goes off, gets burnt and they're out of the game. You keep going until there's only one person left. He says, oh, you mean time bomb? Right? That's a bomb you're throwing around. When the timer goes off, it blows up. So whoever's touching it is out of the game. I said, okay, time bomb. I said, when someone throws you that time bomb, what do you do with it? And he showed me, just immediately he'd get rid of it. And I said, well, that's a lot like, and I said, I know you like picnics. I know you like hot dogs. If we were on a picnic and I was stupid enough to reach in and grab a hot coal and throw it to you, what would you do with it? And he showed me again. And I said, well, that's a lot like angry thinking. It's normal to have angry thinking. We all have angry thinking. And we only get into trouble when we hold on to it. If we hold on to it, we get burnt or we blow up. I saw the kid have an insight. And insight is realizing what's true. He saw that he was a thinker, no judgment. He saw that his feelings were created from thought, and he saw it very deeply. How do I know he saw it deeply? I saw him on a Monday, and on Friday I get a call from the principal, and the principal says, what did you do to this kid? I say, what do you mean? He says, he's been here all week. He hasn't had a single fight. And usually he'd be trying to have fights all day long. He's not angry all the time. As a matter of fact, we see him start to get angry and then he lets go of it. He's resilient. You wouldn't even know there was anything wrong with him. What did you do? I said, I didn't do anything to him. I reminded him he already had this, right? I showed him how thought creates experience, and he realized it for himself. You know how deeply I knew he saw it, Jay? He comes into me in a couple sessions later. And by the way, this continued. He didn't have to leave public school. He continued in the class. They took away his guard. Parents weren't nervous that he was going to hurt their kids anymore. He became a healthy, functioning kid in the class. He comes into me after we had had only like 3 sessions. He goes, "Dicken, would you work with my dad?" And I say, "Why do you want me to work with your dad?" And he says, "He doesn't understand where his anger comes from. He doesn't know it's his own thinking."
Brilliant.
Now, here's a boy
That's
who was
amazing.
being physically abused, who woke up to it was so empowering. It was so empowering. He woke up out of living in the nightmare of his own thinking. Now listen, the abuse was horrible, and it was absolutely right to make an intervention to protect this kid and to help the father. And if you hit somebody with a baseball bat and then they walk away and they're not there, and you pick up the baseball bat and keep hitting yourself on the head innocently, with the stories we tell ourselves, we keep alive or keep creating painful experience. And to eliminate that is what it is to be healthy, or to reduce that, to have less thinking that burdens us, that weighs on us, that hurts us, right? And so that's possible for anyone. So here's this kid, he goes from rage to understanding or realization to freedom from his own psychological experience to compassion in a very short period of time. Now, that's my story. That's everybody's story. Which one of us doesn't at times get caught up in thinking? That thinking creates a feeling. We think it has to do with the world, so we feel helpless and we get more frustrated, more enraged, more upset, and it innocently feeds on itself. But the good news is these principles give us a direction to look so that we can wake up out of thought, drop into pure consciousness, right? Where we do the best. I would recommend that to anybody. If we're even in life and death situations, they don't tell people, think yourself into a frenzy. Hold on to thinking. They say, stay calm, get present. It's only in the present you have your best chance of dealing with this life and death situation. And it's happened to thousands and thousands of people. Now we can help people understand that dynamic in their daily life so that people can begin to wake up out of thinking that's weighing on us and find a lightness of being and a flow and an ease that's our natural state.
I love the story that you just shared, Dicken. You know, that's one thing about you. I always know that I'll never be let down because you've got so many stories, some decades, 4+ decades of um, practicing psychology, as well as embracing the teachings of Sydney Banks. You bring such a calm. I could tell you that one of the tools I reach for when I'm in thought and I'm struggling to get out of those thoughts is I think of Dicken Bettinger. I go, where's Dicken Bettinger? Where can I find him speaking? And I go to your Facebook feed or I go to YouTube, and sure enough, you always show up just on time in my own life because, you know, you and I met over 3 years ago at a retreat that you were hosting with 3 other facilitators from the 3 principles. And I quickly fell in love because I fell in love with the teachings. I fell in love with the whole concept of how I could live my life differently. And through that experience, I have been able to come home to myself. And I got on the banner going across the bottom there. It says, "Coming Home with Author Dicken Bettinger." With just a few minutes that we do have left here in this conversation, Could you perhaps just share with us, what does coming home for you mean? What does it mean to you?
Home is another word of the space in which, as human beings, we're most comfortable. We feel at home with ourselves, with life, in the world. That's another word for ease, perhaps, another word for peace of mind. That I've worked with people, all kinds of people. My story was about a 7-year-old, but I've worked with people mandated to see me from prison. I've worked with people, executives for 16 years. I worked in top corporations teaching this as leadership programs and executive development and training. I've worked with people who have been abused their whole life, people who have spent their life in mental institutions. Doesn't matter, we're all the same. We all think, we're all aware, we all have a mind, and at core we have perfect well-being, but for our thinking and the way we get involved in thinking innocently, and the way we get involved in thinking that creates feelings that then we attribute to the world innocently. So it's been a heck of a ride, Jay, and heck of a career. 33 years ago, coming across Sid Banks, and suddenly to have a way of understanding all people. I see people anywhere. They're present, they're caught up in thought, they're living in the feeling of their thinking. They either know it or they don't. You begin to have enormous compassion. Enormous. We're all doing the best we can given what we understand about this. Right? So it's home is being able to wake up out of our conditioning, out of our memory, be free of memory, to be standing wide open and aware and awake. That's home. Why is that home? Because that's when we do our best. That's when we can deal with any crises or any difficulties, even life and death ones like coronavirus.
I just want to share with you, Dicken, that um, although we were not able to communicate, going back to your experience of having lived through coronavirus, one thing I will share with you is that I had total faith that you were going to be okay,
Hmm.
because I just had this knowing, didn't come from my thoughts. It just was an inner knowing that you are strong. You are stronger than a virus. That you just have the ability to. I knew you were going to go within, and you probably weren't going to even have time to go to thought because you were in so much physical pain.
Huh.
But somehow I just had this knowing that you were going to be okay. And it was beautiful that your beautiful wife of over 50 years did reach out to me. She did call me. We did have a brief conversation. I'm not even sure if you were aware of that or not. At some point during those 17 days. But I was so excited.
Well, I
The
know.
day that I saw you post that you had come home, you had awakened,
Yeah.
and you shared in this conversation today that for 4 days, no thoughts came through your mind. You were just so present in nature, uh, seeing life through a different set of lenses that you hadn't perhaps seen for that amount of time consecutively. And I have so enjoyed our conversation today.
Oh, thank you, Jay. Thank you. That's really beautiful, man. I know you've always been very interested in the connection between psychological and physical well-being, and that as we begin to understand the nature of thought and the power and beauty of dropping out of thinking into the now. As we begin to understand that more deeply, every one of us starts to experience greater ease. And when we have greater ease, there's less stress in the system. They're finding out stress doesn't cause stress. It's the thinking we do about it, the stories we make up about it, that creates the real problem for us, right? So as we have less stress, we have a stronger immune system. We have a stronger immune system. It's easier to deal with anything. That's what I'm seeing.
I want to take a moment to just two things. One is acknowledge that the tears that I just shared, but truly are tears of gratitude, and just so thankful that that you made it through your experience, and that you're continuing to share your understanding of the three principles, and what your mentor and teacher Sydney Banks shared with you. I believe you met when you're of the young age of 40,
Yeah.
and today at the young age of 72, you continue to share as you experience your own life with those that are interested to learn how to live in the now, how to let go of the thoughts that no longer serve us, and live in the now, in this moment. And with that, I would like to thank you for joining both myself and those from the community that have joined us live and on replay. Dr. Dicken Bettinger, you can find him on all booksellers. Coming Home is the name of his book. I co-authored it with Natasha. Dicken Bettinger, live from the Pacific Northwest. Thank you so much for joining me today on Real People, Real Stories Live.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks, Jay. Wow. You're a good man. Thank you.
We'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.